Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Deputy President. Today I rise to discuss the National Disability Insurance Scheme Amendment, getting the NDIS back on track, number 1 Bill of 2024. And this scheme must get back on track. It needs to get back on track for the sustainability of the NDIS so that the critical role it plays in so many Australians' lives can be protected. Australians with disability before the scheme were too often unseen and unheard, living in our shadows. People with disability were too often subject to the misery lottery. That is, disability support was incredibly patchy across the country, very much so in my own home state of Western Australia. Depending on your postcode, you might get lucky enough to have some funding to help you, your family, or you would live a life of complete uncertainty, disadvantage and poverty. And of course, it was subject to also how you had acquired your disability. And there was much discrimination based on whether you were born with a disability or whether, for example, you had acquired a brain or a spinal injury or a degenerative condition at some other point in life. It was clear then, just as it is clear now, we need a whole system of disability support across our nation. And we need to make sure the NDIS is fit for purpose to support people with disability, particularly those with the most complex support needs. Complex support needs, which mean they can be vulnerable to exploitation, to missing out on the critical services they need, and they can be vulnerable to exploitation from providers who aren't doing the right thing to uphold the support needs of their clients. So our Parliament made that decision a decade ago that we should not let someone's postcode or financial situation dictate whether or not they got the services they need. But today, and this sits behind the legislation that we are debating here today, there are new lotteries emerging for people's NDIS support based, for example, on whether you have an ethical or unethical provider. And I find it startling, frankly, that the Greens and the Coalition are not here to stand by to make sure that the NDIS is cleaned up, to weed out unethical providers, to make sure that people can get the support that they need. The 10 years of NDIS that we've had has fundamentally changed Australia. It represents the best of us as a nation. It represents us and our values as a nation about giving Australians a fair go. It represents, if you like, a levelling of the playing field. And it is one that can and should and must continue to evolve over time in deep consultation with people with disability, in co-design with people with disability, just as this legislation sets out. The NDIS is not currently working well for everyone. We've heard from participants about how every interaction for people with the NDIS can become a battle. We spoke through the Senate Community Affairs hearing about the struggles of so many that they have had to undergo in getting the support that they need. We have done our best to consult through the Community Affairs Committee, but I really want to also highlight the fact that this has come also at the back end from the NDIS review process, as well as the many town halls that the Department of Social Services held into this review and its implementation. Our inquiry had over 200 submissions, heard from 50 witnesses. We held 2 lived experience panels. We heard from agencies. We held hearings across 3 days. And those 3 hearings, we've heard a lot of evidence that the government has been tuned into and making changes to the legislation in response to issues raised. Some of the concerns that have come forward that were identified in the review, but also very much identified in our inquiry, which this legislation is here to fix, is that while some people can manage an unregistered provider, lack of registration has led to exploitation and abuse, and that there is very little oversight currently of the scheme. I would also note that the provision of unregistered services is leading to the exploitation of workers in a gig-like economy. Some of the nation's biggest disability service providers insist that their workers have their own ABN so that they don't have to pay their superannuation, and that they can keep their hours low so that they don't have to pay a whole range of things, like make people responsible for their own workers' compensation and the like. This means that quality providers who want to provide registered services are not just being undercut by one-on-one relationships where someone wants to recruit someone of their own accord and put their own team together. I understand the need to do that. But this lack of registration is actually seeing some of our nation's biggest disability support providers exploiting workers and undercutting their working conditions. Now, I understand that this legislation is first and foremost about people with disability and their need for the supports and the capacity of this system to provide those supports. However, I contend that if you have providers that are putting people out there in the system with their own ABN, when in fact they have thousands of workers on the books, is not going to result in quality support and quality systems. The scheme's integrity chief, John Dardo, told the Senate committee about the extent of fraud and illegal activity his team were seeing and how stopping it since it was set up in late 2022. So it is, in my view, incredibly shocking to hear that funding supposed to be used for packages of support for people with permanent and significant disabilities could instead be used to fund criminal activities, to purchase cars, holidays, fraudulent providers withdrawing plan funds from ATMs, to even buy illicit substances. So now, under our government, we are checking thousands of invoices every day, whereas previously only 20 invoices across thousands of them issued to the agency were being checked on a daily basis. Previously, if you put in a claim, it was just paid. This is why, as part of this reform process, we are making sure that we're able to clean up the scheme, to catch crooks, so that people with disability get the money spent on them and their support needs, their primary support needs. Ever since Labor was elected, we've invested a mammoth fraud cleanup job, including $126 million in funding over 4 years to establish the Fraud Fusion Task Force. And in February of this year, we announced funding of the $83.9 million program to improve the integrity of the NDIS. But improving this integrity fundamentally means also needing to change some of its regulation, because it is the problems in the underlying regulation and law that mean it is too difficult to clean the NDIS up without the law reform that is before us today. We want the NDIS to continue to be able to change lives for the better. This is an investment in people. It is an investment in our nation. We are creating jobs and careers, small businesses, innovative startups, for people delivering businesses, providing services, including many businesses providing employment for people with disability, supporting and providing services to other people with disability. But it is too important to politicise this issue in the way that it has been, to not take the opportunity to get it right and to fix it for the future. This Labor government is absolutely committed to getting the NDIS reform right. We're committed to co-design, hearing NDIS participants and protecting this scheme now and for future generations.
Senator